welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today in the show, we have Rebekah Diamond. She is a pediatrician and she's the author of the book, Parent Like a Pediatrician, All of the Facts, None of the Fear. Her excerpt from that book on Kevin MD is titled, The Internet Broke Parenting. This Pediatrician Can Fix It. Rebekah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we'll get into your book and excerpt in a little bit, but first off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Yeah, it's all related. So I'm a pediatrician and I did my medical school training at Mount Sinai in New York City. I'm from the Northeast. And then I went and I did my pediatrics residency at the University of Michigan, which was phenomenal. And around that time, I decided to have a baby. So I was pregnant in residency and did the whole pregnancy postpartum thing there. I had a residency that was as supportive as they get, but I really struggled. And I really struggled even as a pediatrician to know what to do, which to me was like, that's strange. I thought I was supposed to be this baby expert. I thought I was supposed to know things as a pediatrician. So I was very overwhelmed, but I made it through. Started my job as a pediatric hospitalist at Columbia in New York City, which is where I work now, and tried to do it all. Tried to be a mom, a doctor, followed the American Academy of Pediatric advice as best I could without losing my mind. It was just really tough. And the reason I wanted to do this book is because I felt like I really didn't know where to go for parenting advice. And that the American Academy of Pediatrics, we make these really good recommendations as best we can, but sometimes they seem a little bit like in a vacuum and not really sure how you're going to translate it to your day-to-day life and make it realistic. And you go to your pediatrician appointments and pediatricians are great, but you never feel like you have enough time there to ask your questions. You always go to the internet. And man, oh man, was the internet giving me lots of scary advice. So the idea behind everything was, let's find some advice from actual pediatricians, actual parents, which thankfully there are more and more of online these days. So I can tell you where it's okay to bend the rules and where we're just doing our best, but where maybe it actually does matter. Like it really does matter if you get your kids vaccinated. Some places will make it seem like it's all up for debate. Some things are and some things aren't. And so that's what led me where I am today.
Now, from your experience as a pediatrician, tell me about some of the misinformation that parents typically come to you with that you have to spend time in the exam room or at the hospital trying to dispel.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's so much. And I think that's been one of the most frustrating parts of pediatrics. We like to brag and say before COVID was around and COVID vaccines were around, we were dealing with that misinformation before it was cool, as we say. But vaccine misinformation is something I feel like we've been dealing with for decades and something I certainly dealt with from day one of my training as an intern, in residency. And it sparked a lot of what I do because it was really upsetting, and it always is upsetting to see these parents who are such good parents and they really are doing their research and they want what's best for their kids. And they found this information that looks really good, but it's really driven by profit. It's really predatory, and it's here for the COVID vaccines. It's here for the other vaccines. Vaccines are a huge one. All sorts of things about feeding and sleep. And it's really no shortage of misinformation that you could find. But I would say the winner is still vaccines and what I have to deal with every day.
So in your excerpt, you write that the internet broke parenting. So go more into that. How did the internet break parenting?
I'm not one to say the good old days a lot. I'm not a person who says America was better back when or things were better back when. I don't really think that. I think our advances have been good and our recognition of things has been good. That being said, it's not that things were so much better with parenting back in the days, but there wasn't this overload of information. And it's not even just information. It's like this very specific, anxiety-provoking, strict, almost like philosophical and entrenched beliefs information telling you you can only be a good parent if you do things exactly this way or follow exactly this blog's advice. And I think it's really hard, especially as an exhausted new parent in a world of understandably mounting anxiety, to look at that and say, maybe that doesn't feel right, but they seem to know what they're doing. And this person is giving their kid exactly 20 minutes of screen time a day, or so they say, and giving them organic foods and not vaccinating or delaying vaccinations. It all looks good. I should probably do that. And you can find a million different examples of that versus maybe if we had a more reputable, streamlined internet information system, you wouldn't just be bombarded with all of that stuff all of the time. And you might have a moment as a parent to say, okay, I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I have the gist of it. I love my kid. I'm going to give him food and a home and take him to the doctor and take him to school and tell him I love them in the morning. And that's
Mhm.
pretty good, and the rest sort of may be what it may.
So you did mention it, information overload, and that's really I would guess, the strength and weakness of the internet. And you said parents, busy parents especially, they're just bombarded with all this information. That's only worsened during COVID. So what are some tips from your standpoint in terms of how parents can sort through all that information and know what's reliable or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I never tell parents don't go online or don't look for other information. It's not realistic and it doesn't make sense either. You should be able to have social networks and you should be able to look for different things. I think it's if you could keep the number of sites and the number of platforms you're looking at, be judicious about them. There's not like a specific number, I would say, but if you're finding yourself looking at 30 different sites before you feel empowered to make a decision, I would just wonder what's going on that you don't feel that sense of, I know what to do. Maybe let me just check with one or two places. So that's a big one. And then the other one is, of course, just as much as you do your research for these different things, do your research into who you're listening to. You certainly don't have to trust me. I don't know you. And
Mhm.
I understand being skeptical, but I put out there what my conflicts of interest are, my motivations, my training, my approach, and I try to be transparent about that. And if you're finding that you're following someone who sells a lot of supplements or has a lot of products they endorse or something that just feels like maybe they're getting something out of this, they have a reason to make you feel a certain way, then I would just take a moment and question that. I think those are probably my biggest things.
Sometimes a lot of this misinformation comes from other physicians, and you look up their qualifications and their credentials, and they're all impeccable. They come from these big name academic medical centers, yet sometimes the information that they're supporting online isn't necessarily evidence based. So, how do you advise parents who come across that type of information from these supposedly reputable physicians online?
Yeah, that is honestly, that's just like the tragedy these days, one of the many tragedies. And COVID certainly brought a lot of, people who I don't know if they're bad actors necessarily, but maybe just misinformed themselves or didn't quite understand how to put things in context, especially around children. COVID and kids debate got a little bit misinformed throughout the course of the pandemic. So it's really hard. You're right. It's not like you can just see someone who says, MD, this school looks good, makes sense what they're saying. There's so much background and context. So I think this comes to the point of, it's another theme in my book and in what I say is the difference between data and science, which as a physician, we love evidence-based medicine. We love to talk about like, where's the data? And we even have like data-driven parenting as a whole movement right now. And I love the sentiment of it, but like I tell my residents when I'm with them or parents when I'm on rotations, like, your baby wasn't the baby in the study. Your kid wasn't in the randomized controlled trial, or maybe there wasn't a randomized controlled trial because we don't have a lot of data, but we have this other like
Mhm.
biology and common sense. And maybe I know the risks and benefits in a certain way, and I know the risks of something are so bad that I want to avoid them no matter what. So I think it's again, this is really hard and nuanced, but if you don't see a lot of context in the discussions, like if people are anything that's coming off as an extreme, I think is a red flag. Anything that's coming with so just constant data and not really a lot of discussion about what that means for a human person. I think those are some red flags. But again, this is why it's so tough out there. And I think you have to build your networks of people and experts who can help you sort through it, which is what I hope to do. And I know my colleagues bring it to your pediatrician. Let us look at it. Maybe we can help you.
One of the things I mentioned earlier was a deterioration of patients' trust in physicians and medical institutions. Have you seen that yourself through your experiences over the last few years?
Yeah, definitely. COVID was not great for that. It was already hitting issues before that. And again, I'm a pretty critical of the systems person. So I don't come in and say, why don't patients believe us? Again, I'm not for the good old days where it was just like, okay, doc, whatever you say. I really do welcome challenging the system and challenging some of the real issues that we have. But again, it's been really misdirected. And so this distrust of vaccines, this distrust of COVID information, yeah, it's really hard to maintain that therapeutic alliance, like you said. So I definitely see it.
We're talking to Rebekah Diamond. She's a pediatrician and she's the author of the book, Parent Like a Pediatrician, All of the Facts, None of the Fear. Rebekah, I'm sure you're aware there are many parenting books out there. What separates yours from all the other ones out there?
Yeah. Oh man, there are a lot of parenting books. Before I wrote one, I told everyone don't buy one, and I never bought one. So I appreciate being overwhelmed. Again, information overload. Mine, I really do think mine is different. I wouldn't have written one if I thought it was just going to be another parenting book. I honestly don't have enough free time to devote myself to just, I'm a full-time physician, as most people know. So this gives you real advice, but it's not one size fits all advice. It's not just a recipe for that. And so it's not an American Academy of Pediatrics, or there's these different things that are saying, do this, do that, here's what you need to do exactly, because that doesn't make sense. But I'm also not the other type of parenting book, which is more or less like, here's why it doesn't really matter. You shouldn't be so anxious, do whatever you want. And I understand why those books, whether they're data driven or guilt free, they all have different sort of names. I understand the appeal of it because we've made things so rigid and complicated, but I do feel like this is the first book that I found where someone like me was willing to go out there and say, okay, I'm going to tell you that things actually do matter, but I'm going to deviate from the by the book stuff and just give you an approach to understand what the range of options are, how important certain things might be. I'll show you the evidence behind it. I won't be obsessed with the data behind it, but I'll give you the context, like we were saying. I'll tell you not just the data on breastfeeding. I'm not going to say it has health benefits. Here they are, X, Y, and Z, but they're not that big because I compared it to this. I'll explain that stuff briefly, but I'll say, here's how this looks in the modern world. Here's how I came to my decisions for doing that. And here's why, in this case, I would do this, but if you don't, that's okay. For the vaccine conversation, I give a very long chapter going through it all to say at the end, actually, I said at the beginning, if you don't want to read it and you want to just go ahead and vaccinate your kid, you can. That's really the right answer. There really isn't a reason to go through all this. So I'm nothing's black and white, but there's some decisions that the range of choices is really narrow, and there's some decisions where the range is really wide. And I really was looking for a book that would have a pediatrician parent who actually would tell you what those choices are.
And my final question, tell me some of the main messages, take-home points that you want readers to come away with after reading your book.
Yeah, I just want parents to feel empowered. I really want that. I want them to feel confident. I want them to realize that they really do know how to do this. They love their kids. And that while it's okay to ask questions and doubt yourself and doubt others and even distrust the medical system, that's all fine, but it's also okay to just trust what you're doing, partner with your medical provider, do what works for you, and listen to science. Science has a little bit of a bad rap these days. We don't have to be rigid and follow data completely, but we can use science. Science is good. We talk a lot about how things used to be in the natural world, or where things used to be for babies before we had all this industrial toxins and all this stuff. And that's a complicated topic, but the reality is back in the old days, like a lot of kids died, a lot of babies died, and bad things happened. And so you can be a holistic, overarching, loving parent with a healthy distrust of the medical system and still want to take advantage of science to help your kids. And ultimately, that's all pediatricians want. That's all we want for you. So hopefully we can start to repair that parent pediatrician divide. I think it's about time.
Rebekah, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much.